Welcome to this lecture on functionalism. So, in this lecture, I would first like to clarify what functionalism actually is. I will then introduce the most renowned functionalist theory of the 20th century in the United States, that is Talcott Parsons' structural functionalism, to then present Niklas Luhmann's extension of Parsons' theory into a system theory. And I will conclude with some of the criticisms that have been made to functionalism by particularly conflict theorists. So nowadays, it is very easy to get the objection that your argument is a functionalist one. So it's almost like a stopper of any kind of argument. If you're accused of functionalism, this is certainly very bad and beyond any discussion. And this was different actually throughout much of the history of sociology, where functionalism was even the dominant paradigm. At the end of the lecture, I would like to revive some of the functionalist ideas, let's say the sounder ones, that do not necessarily buy into the full package of functionalism. So I think there is a function of functionalist kind of arguments in sociology, even if this is not always admitted. So let's clarify the concept first. So what is actually functionalism and in which forms does it occur? So it's a very easy starter. We use function ascriptions of the kind that the function of x is y, right? Or that for y to work, it just needs x in our everyday life. And we also use it very naturally in scientific discourse. So first, just the version of functionalism is simply we ascribe functions to certain objects or to individuals. Then there is this use of functionalism in the sense that we use a function in order to explain the existence or the persistence of social phenomena. So religion exists, for instance, because it fulfills the function to integrate societies. Yeah? And this is already a very different variety of the use of functionalism. So yes, a classic here in anthropology, Radcliffe Brown has this example of a certain functionalist statement about religious practices, or Jon Elster, who is a certain critic also of functionalism, here with an example: the function of firms' decision practices is to promote profits in markets. Yet another variety of functionalism refers to the statement society is a whole and consists of functional parts. So this variety of functionalism is already going a little bit beyond the previous ones, which are more local. This statement here is about a much more global functionalism, where functionalism is a grand theory even of society. Along similar lines here, society has functional needs, right? Requisites that must be fulfilled. Every society needs perhaps an education system, you may say, in order to functionally persist, or it needs a military in order to defend its boundaries. It needs an economic system in order to thrive materially, and so on. Yet another use of the term functionalism is present in institutionalism, so theory of institutions, where all institutions might have necessarily certain functions for the whole. So this also is an application of a grand functionalist theory here applied to institutions. That is much present also in the neo-institutionalism, particularly in economics, where institutions are seen as efficient solutions to functional problems, with the characteristic of these institutions being invented by rational actors. So these are a couple of different varieties of functionalism. Let us conclude here with the last one that I quote here from actually my predecessor in office, Harald Wenzel, who wrote this informative entry here on functionalism in the International Encyclopedia of the Social and Behavioral Sciences. Just a footnote here. I recommend this encyclopedia anytime that you look for an unknown term or theory or author. Take a look at the first or second, I think there's even a latest online edition of this international encyclopedia to clarify the term. So here the quote goes, social systems involve the variation of heterogeneous interdependent components that can be accounted for in a model of equilibrium, in the ideal case in the form of a system of functional equations. End of quote. So the additional feature to the previous ones here is that functionalism here comes in the form of a system even, so that a system theory might grasp what functionalism is, and one that may even be explicated in terms of mathematical equations. So let's take a brief look into the history of functionalism. So at the very beginning in the 17th century, functionalist thought was present above all in what we would call nowadays theories of international relations in political science, or also foreign trade theories, where the idea was that foreign trade or international relations are sort of in an interdependent system where, for instance, if a country exports too much, then there is upward pressure on its currency, the terms of trade change, the exports will become more expensive in the next period and therefore decrease again and balancing out the system. And this kind of implicit functionalist theory you find, for instance, in David Hume already, or also in international relations, so relations between political actors. If one actor becomes too strong, for instance, then the neighboring actors have an incentive to level up their military capacities, and there's always a certain functional balancing. Yeah. Then most importantly for sociology, you may have noticed this already when reading Durkheim, the 19th century, and Spencer in particular. So the 19th century thought was permeated by this idea that society is like an organism. So there was a translation of the organicistic metaphor from biology into society, and much as certain organs have a function for the persistence and proper functioning of the entire body, individual institutions then also have a certain function for the persistence of society. And this very basic functionalist thought, so with the whole being society, with regard to which every institutional element then serves a proper function, this is most present then in Spencer's and Durkheim's thought, but it is also present in the classical authors in anthropology. So I already mentioned Radcliffe Brown here with that example about the function of religion, but there's also Bronislaw Malinowski, who was trapped on the Trobriand Island, wrote a book about it, and many of the ways in which he understands institutions or rituals in tribal societies then make use of functionalism, and he's probably one of the pronounced also references for functionalism in general. Then let's move into the 20th century, where functionalism is quite present in the Soviet economist Leontiev's writings about analyzing economic sectors through input-output analyses, where every sector has a function for other sectors in an economy. Then cybernetic theories from the 1940s onward, also with this paradigmatic thermostat, right, where the relationship then between a heating system regulated through a thermostat and the external environment and its temperatures follow a certain functional interdependency, right? If temperature goes below a certain point, the thermostat reacts and switches on the heating system up to the point where the heating system transforms again the temperature in the external environment to a certain point, which then again is sensed by the thermostat that switches off the heating system again. And this very cybernetic thinking then in the 20th century also made its inroads in thinking about society in terms of this very mechanistic sort of understanding, but not simple mechanics where just simple causal relationships, A brings about B, are predominant, but where you have functional interdependencies. Ariane Leendertz, whom I refer to here on this slide, has also written an interesting history, also now out as a book, about complexity theories and the history of complexity theories. And she shows how in the post-Second World War, social science, then complexity and complexity reduction became a very dominant kind of term around which many of the social sciences were organized. Yeah. So one basic idea behind modeling also society as a system is again to not like consider society in a very, let's say, a linear way, where just variables sort of add up linearly, but to model them in an interacting way. Yeah. So example for analyzing then a society through systems, so think about traffic systems or also entire cities, are again taken from other sciences. So the system notion that emerged in the later 20th century is again a way of bridging the interdisciplinary divide, where a system may be used by biologists, by meteorologists, by physicists, but yes, also by social scientists. So system is a little bit the 20th century replacement for the more traditional organicistic metaphor of the 19th century, if you want. So in a previous lecture, I mentioned that already in the 19th century, one motivation for social science had been just the realization of social engineering ideas, right? Starting with Saint-Simon in the early French socialism. And with system theories then in the 20th century, this idea also had a comeback, where just social scientists thinking about society as a system were basically just figuring out which sort of lever to change, which sort of input to change in order to have a better output. Some of this thinking also goes back to, if you want, the invention of the economy, as Mitchell would put it, in macroeconomics and macro statistics of the 1920s and 30s. Right, think about the rise of Keynesianism, John Maynard Keynes, and economic planning, where the economy was also modeled in a way as a system